Good afternoon to you. Mark Stott of HurricaneTrack.com. Here it is Friday the 23rd of June 2023, and on today's update we're going to talk about Bret and Cindy and then what is next. We don't want to overlook and just go past Bret and Cindy, but we're coming up on the weekend. A lot of people are wondering about what's happening elsewhere in the tropics, I am sure, not only in the short term but in the long term as well. So we'll take a look at that in today's update. Good to have you join me this Friday. Hope it's going well for you. Let's get on with it, shall we? All right, first of all, our tracking map off the HurricaneTrack Insider site. Here we are, 2 named storms there in June in the main development region. It is historic despite the fact that they are pretty weak overall. After all, it is June, so climatology still does play a role. So let's zoom in here and see what we've got. First of all, with Bret, definitely on the weaker side now, going to track across the southern Caribbean and probably dissipate somewhere in this area. There's just too much in the way of dry air. There's also an upper level tut or trough in the upper atmosphere carved out through here roughly. I'll show you that in a minute on some of the computer modeling when we go look under the hood, as they say, of why Bret is struggling. But Bret went through the islands over here, some flooding, gusty winds from time to time. Rather disorganized storm it was, but it still did bring some impacts down that way. Saw a few videos and whatnot on social media. Nothing too terrible, thank goodness, but still a warning shot, I think, that the Atlantic hurricane season 2023 does mean business. 2 systems there, very well organized tropical waves developing into tropical storms in the main development region in the month of June, like we saw with the Atlantic as warm as it is and will continue to be. I think this is a harbinger of things to come. It just makes sense. All right, it's not so much a prediction as logic. You just follow the logic. And history tells us the last few times this has happened, of course, we've never had 2 of them form like this in the month of June, so it's kind of unprecedented, right? But 2017 we had Bret, and that was a pretty big season, as we all recall. Will it end up like that? Well, we don't know. No 2 seasons are exactly alike, so we'll just have to wait and see. But Bret's going to go through the Caribbean and not really cause too many problems, except for any shipping interests that are out there that might have to avoid some of those stronger squalls. All right? All right, so what about Cindy? We back the map out a little bit here. Cindy's going to last a little bit longer, and there is a chance, I'll show you this on the modeling in a minute, that it could try to come back to life after it dies off a little bit. We don't want to write it off yet. That's the problem with looking ahead, is you don't want to look past where you are currently. But there is a chance that it tries to make somewhat of a more solid appearance, if you will, later on down the road. I'll also show you what I mean by that in just a little bit. One of our patrons was asking about the similarities in the track of Cindy with Andrew in 1992. We remember that Andrew came out of the deep tropics. It was sheared by some upper level troughing, looked like it was about dead, and then it bent back to the west, came through the Bahamas, and the rest, as they say, is history. It went on in to make landfall there near Morgan City, roughly on a track like that. This probably, you never know everything when it comes to weather, certainly, but the setup is completely different. The pattern, the time of year. It's very, very unlikely that Cindy would take a track anything similar to Andrew, but you never say never. You can't just completely guarantee something's going to happen with the weather, usually until it's actually happening, but a very unlikely scenario. Similar evolutions, and I do like that people are watching and paying attention. I think that's a positive. They are recognizing history, they are recognizing patterns, and I think that's a good thing, just to be on top of it and to know when you see something that is similar to something in the past. That can be very helpful. So just wanted to address that. But we're going to look closer at Cindy's future on the GFS in just a moment. First of all, let's take a few satellite imagery stops if we can. Let's use blue to make everything highlight here. There is Bret, quite a mess down there. There's the low-level center. We're going to zoom in on it in just a moment. Here is Cindy. Still struggling, yes, but it is better organized than Bret. Finally, some African dust showing up in the satellite view here, kind of an S shape to the clouds and the overall low cloud pattern. in the eastern Atlantic, a pretty strong tropical wave interacting with the intertropical convergence zone down here. We are leaving well, maybe it's leaving us, this window of favorability, this convectively coupled Kelvin wave, a pretty short period of time, several days roughly, that it just kind of comes through. It creates a moist environment, lower shear, and then it moves on. Like I said in many updates in the past, it's kind of like a shot of Red Bull. I've never had Red Bull, but I've gotten my sugar fix when I've been on long road trips, and you get the Milky Way and the Doritos and the Sprite or whatever. Very bad for you, but you feel good temporarily until that sugar high wears off. And it's kind of the same thing down in the tropics. These little impulses come through. They make things temporarily better for tropical systems to develop, and then that pattern changes. And then the systems have to struggle a little bit, and then they maybe get into another favorable pattern down the road. That again is what that one patron of ours was talking about. Andrew found that back in 1992, but again, it's a different scenario now. But regardless, the favorable pattern that we saw that gave us Bret and Cindy is kind of gone now. Now we're into a more unfavorable pattern, and I'll unpack and dig deeper into that, as they say, to show you what I mean as we progress. First, close-up satellite view of Bret. And, look, it's weakening, it's disheveled, but it's remarkable to see. As a fan of tropical meteorology and the weather in general, this is really cool to see, you have to admit. And let me stop it on that last frame there. So these are your little arc clouds that are coming out. Those are from collapsed thunderstorms. All right, and if you're out there on the ocean, those look really cool, I bet. That is the low-level center of Bret. Easy to spot. Makes it easy when it's naked swirl like that, right? And this is your dying convection over here. It's just a big mess. Sheer, dry air, all of those things have taken a toll, and Bret has become essentially decoupled from the deep thunderstorms, and it's going to be a depression probably at 5, I would think. Maybe they hold on to tropical storm intensity operationally, and they can adjust that later in the off-season when they go back and review everything if necessary. But there are ship interests down there, shipping interests, right? And it's not too darn far away from some of these islands here off the north coast of South America. It's far enough away that I don't think there will be any direct impacts, but, close enough that the Hurricane Center will certainly be on top of it, regardless of how it looks there, pretty beat up, right? Right. All right, now Cindy, a little bit better organized because it's farther away from these negative impacts and conditions in the Caribbean. Pretty decent outflow overall with Cindy in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Pretty good feeder band trying to get that moisture to stay in there. Cindy's going to struggle. It may even open up into a wave, a tropical wave again at some point. But then we're going to have to watch it later on once it gets up into the subtropics of the western Atlantic, and we'll get into that in just a moment. All right, first, and I should have a card for this, going under the hood. And what this means is, you talk about cars, you open up the hood of the car and you get in there and you tinker around and you see what's going on with the engine of a car. That's that analogy or metaphor or whatever you call it. So let's go under the hood of why Bret looks like it does. Wasn't that in the movie Twister when Bill Paxton's character said to Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, why don't you explain to her, I think he was talking about his fiancée Jo. No, Jo was Helen Hunt. Doesn't matter. He was explaining to Jamie Gertz's character, tell her why you are the way you are, or something like that. Well, this explains Twister references, right? This explains why Bret is the way Bret is, okay? Going under the hood. So let's do that. This is the 5,000 foot level, and again, one of my favorite levels of the atmosphere to look at in the analysis here. And you look at this and you go, look at that. It's got a pretty good skeleton, so to speak, to work with. And we can see that, just real quick, go back over to the visible satellite. There it is. That's the low levels of the atmosphere. That's literally the vorticity and the shape and everything that we are seeing right there. So you go, well, it's got a pretty good 5,000 foot or 850 millibar structure. What's the problem? Well, for this, let's go up to the upper atmosphere. And there you go. That's the culprit right there, this tut carved out tropical upper tropospheric trough, and it is getting sheared, beat up. It's just not good, and it's injecting dry air into the system, kind of like if you blow across a frothy pot of noodles. You're making spaghetti or mac and cheese, and those noodles get all bubbly, and you just put a plate, fan it across, or you blow it across. You're injecting drier air, and it knocks those bubbles down, and it keeps you from making a mess on your stove. This is the same kind of thing. These upper level winds, Bret went right into it. So that's a big reason why it is not doing very well right now at all. Now, what about Cindy? Cindy is this area right here, and its low-level vorticity signature also looks pretty healthy. It's round. It looks like a little bullseye there. Concentric rings, right? And so let's just watch this over the coming days. I'll put this into motion frame by frame. 24 hours out, you see Bret, by the way, in the Caribbean pretty much just goes away. 48 hours out, pretty good chance that in 2 days' time, Cindy looks terrible as well on satellite. Might even open up as a tropical wave. More than likely will be a depression. And then watch what happens, though. This is 72 hours. That's 3 days. It's hanging on, almost gone. And then by day 4 and 5, it tries to make a comeback. And then by day 6 and day 7, kind of close to Bermuda there, yes, we're going to have to watch and see. The GFS could be completely overdoing things, absolutely. I've seen a few other people on social media kind of watching this as a slim possibility of happening. So again, let's just jump under the hood for a second. 1 week out, let's see what the upper level pattern looks like on the GFS. And in this situation, it is stuck and placed on the southeast side of an upper trough. So some pretty decent wind shear with it. But if it's moving with the flow, the shear isn't quite as pronounced. So we'll see. It's a week away. More than likely, if we go back down to the lower levels there, Cindy will just kind of dissipate here. It looks like it tries to join up with some weird energy here to its north and east. And that, again, that's almost 4 days away. But something to just at least keep in mind. We won't totally dismiss it, just like I'm not going to jump all over this and make a thumbnail that says epic hurricane headed for so-and-so, because that would be a big crock of BS. Just like saying it's not going to happen. You cannot make definitive black and white statements like that with meteorology. You're just setting yourself up for being wrong. So we will observe, we will wait and see, and if it comes back and it looks strong like it does on the GFS, we will deal with it then. Could be a big wave maker. That might be fun for the surfers, some benefit there, but even that has hazards too, right? So we'll watch and see what happens over the coming days. All right, moving on along. This continues to be the big driver. I know you're probably getting sick of seeing this, but this is huge. It really is. Of course, our El Nino in here, and even that 3.4 region through here, not particularly overwhelming just yet. Yes, we still have the cold water sitting over here off of western North America. And then we've got all this cold water relative to average, and even literally cold water. But what about this right here? I just want to address this real quick. Even my beach right here, Wrightsville Beach, and down to the Grand Strand, Tybee Island off of Jacksonville, Palm Coast, that area, maybe even down to Daytona, it looks like. A little bit chillier than we are used to seeing. We're not seeing those oranges and reds butting up against the coast. And let me just jump ahead real quick before we go further into this. Why? Why are we seeing that? Because of this darn thing. This big upper low, big ridge of high pressure sitting out west, a large portion of it over Texas and Mexico. I mean, obviously, because look, there's hardly any clouds out here. And then you've got, so it's basically like this, and this big upper low is sitting right here. And the flow around of that low, the flow around it has kept everything churned up and just a mess all along the Northeast Gulf. These water temperatures colder, these water temperatures colder, and it's just annoying because I would like to go to the beach with the kids. I like the beach, I like the sun, I like to play on the waves just like you guys do, but most of you, I'm sure. But that upper pattern, and then it's raining there. Speaking of upper patterns, I think you can hear that. Sounds like somebody turned on a big shower. Let's check the radar real quick just to make sure we're not going to start getting thunder and whatnot on me. I got it in airplane mode. Hey, it's recorded live, so anything can happen. I guess it's better than children and dogs bursting into the office. Yep, there's a little bit of a heavy rain squall, but no lightning seen, so that's good. Anyway, back to the program. I'm ready to go to the beach. That pattern will eventually change. We should build in, hopefully, a nice Bermuda high. It's like it's trying to go harder against me, and change the flow around to get some of that warm Atlantic water up against the coastline, probably sometime in July. Just a little sidebar here. If you're wondering why the water temperatures are cool off the coast of Southeast North America there, that's generally the reason. All right, so again, this is the stage, the background. Well, this gentleman here from Florida, a CPA, nevertheless, really tracks the tropics, posts some really good stuff, and I like to cite people who are even-keeled. They don't go overboard, they don't downplay, they just present what's happening. And this is a really interesting Hofmuller diagram from the EPS, that's the Ensemble Prediction System from the ECMWF. And basically, what Danny is talking about here is that these Kelvin waves, remember we talked about that at the beginning, those small windows of opportunity of development, that looks like what the Atlantic will be dominated by this year. A couple of weeks on, when these pass through, a week to 10 days, something like that, a couple weeks off. And as they go through the Eastern Pacific, we'll see activity there. They come to the Atlantic, we will see activity there. So trying to explain this diagram real quick, and this is one of the things that Danny is pointing out, the pattern suggests that we will be dominated by Kelvin waves. The Pacific will likely be favored for most of July, but the Atlantic may have openings. These little green areas right in here, those suggest periods of favorability in the Atlantic basin at these time frames. Maybe a period coming up at the 1st of July, maybe at the last third of July or so, and then a pretty pronounced period pretty far out in time, yes, but the Euro is pretty good at seeing this stuff. Not perfect, pretty good though. I'm just going to zoom in on it if my internet will let me. Come on. So yeah, that's coming up, and look at where it expands through. You know, you got to look at it longitudinally on this map. This is from weathermodels.com. Basin-wide, by the time we get to the very first part of August here, we could see a very favorable setup for the Atlantic basin. Again, there's another period there coming up towards the last third of July, and maybe we open the month of July with a slightly more favorable pattern that we are in now, and we will see. So good catch there by the CPA, the accountant, as we affectionately refer to him. He knows what he's talking about, a Floridian as well, so it's important, and I like that, people keeping up with what's happening out there. I already showed you this. Yep, that's an ugly pattern. And hey, there's that one little storm right there that just dumped probably a quarter-inch of rain on my house. All right, the interactive tracking map is over on our Insider site. What we've done is we have taken our Patreon and we've coupled it with our HurricaneTrack Insider site, the live cams, that awesome interactive map. We've also connected our Discord, especially the younger folks out there that know Discord, they know gaming from Twitch and everything else. Yeah, we have a Discord channel that's very active. I finally got on it a little bit more than a year ago, thanks to the younger crowd of our patrons encouraging me to do so. And it's just a great community, and you can help to fund what we do, but also participate. It's not a subscription or you buy something. It is truly us working together very much like a co-op. So if you're interested, it's patreon.com/HurricaneTrack, or just get the Patreon app and search for HurricaneTrack. All one word, Hurricane T-R-A-C-K, no E-R, it's not Hurricane Tracker, HurricaneTrack, been that way since 1999, and you can check out what we're doing through our crowdfunding and everything else at Patreon, all right? So Bret, Cindy, and what's next? I think we covered quite a lot today. I will be doing these over the weekend, and then next week I'm going to be traveling, going up to New York City and Long Island as well. New York part of that, I guess, the city. Manhattan Island, it's its own island. But anyway, I'm going to be presenting at an emergency management conference up in Stony Brook. I'll talk about that more on Monday, but I will be back tomorrow and Sunday with quick updates just to keep abreast of what's happening in the tropics, especially with Cindy there, may or may not try to do something bigger later on in its lifespan. We shall see. All right? Until we talk again tomorrow, have a great rest of your Friday. Thanks as always for giving me a piece of your day. I appreciate it, and I always hope you learn something. I'm Mark Sudduth, Hurricane Track. I'll see you again tomorrow.